So, hello once again, everyone. Thanks for joining us again here on another episode of the Do It For Yourself podcast. If you've listened before, thank you. If this is your first time, thank you. My name is Steve Taylor. I'm the founder and lead advisor over here at Merited Wealth. And for the last couple of years, I've been setting up this podcast really to highlight items and have interviewees and topics of people that are kind of out there doing it for themselves one way or the other, whether you own your business, whether you're maybe a business development or, it could mean a lot of different things out there to help improve your business, improve skills, and just really get a lot of education out there. And so hopefully if you're here today and you're listening in, hopefully you can get some nuggets around this. So the topic today, I'm real excited to talk about it because it's something that I've been personally affected by in a very, very positive way over the past about 2 years. And I know it's something that's talked about a lot, but everyone kind of does it a little different. So the topic is really masterminds and these groups, kind of what are they coming together, business owners, sharing best practices. And I'm really excited to have a good friend of mine, Josh Blum, on the podcast. Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and how you guys work with these masterminds.
Steve, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast, man. Great to see you again and really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, I'm co-founder and partner of a couple businesses, specifically on the mastermind side, Evolve and Thrive. And I ended up joining a joint venture in this business about a little under a year ago, although masterminds have been something that we've been involved with and working on building out for our other business for quite a long time. From my perspective, a mastermind provides an opportunity for like-minded peers to benefit from the feedback and having a sounding board. And there's a lot of need for that, which is why we wanted to launch a mastermind-esque business for a few years. So my background, Fortune 50, former sales executive, responsible for over $500 million of sales in my career, worked very closely with financial professionals, accountants, and attorneys over the years. Today, I do a whole lot of work with individuals and businesses when it comes to soft skills, human skills training, executive presence, and sales consultation. Between myself and my partners within our mastermind as a support team, we have a doctor of psychology to work on behavior and mental wellness and peak performance. We've got our primary facilitator who's got a former investment banking and private equity and manufacturing background, start to exit in a number of businesses. And then you've got myself with my skill set. And so we bring what I would call a really well-rounded support to the owners that we work with.
That's great. That's great, Josh. So let's kind of unpack this and kind of let's start at the beginning on this, because I think this term mastermind, it kind of gets thrown out a lot. And a lot of people will do it like they'll do study sessions or study groups and they think they're kind of a mastermind. But what I've experienced and what I believe a true mastermind is something kind of different, right? It's a commitment by various parties over a certain period of time. So how would you, maybe the masterminds that you serve, right, and people that come to you and say, I'm interested in doing this, how do you, first of all, define it kind of to them and get them ready to know, like, hey, this is what it is. This is what everyone's signing up for?
Man, I totally agree with you. This idea of mastermind is broad, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We actually don't call what we do a mastermind at all. We consider what we do much more peer advisory. So we call them owner advisory boards because we work with business owners. We're not working with, somebody in the C-suite or a professional working within a larger organization. We are working with owners, and it really is more about peer advisory from our standpoint, because there is a mastermind could mean a lot of things, but generally it can be at times very unstructured. It may or may not be cultivated with true peers. There's an accountability component, and there's a lot of shared values between a peer advisory board and a mastermind, but that doesn't necessarily make them the same thing. And so mastermind, we use when we introduce the concept to people because they've heard it and they have at least the foundation of a concept to work from.
Yeah.
But generally, we really try to guide them to understand that what we're working towards is true peer advisory. So on our end, it's funny. We don't feel the need for a commitment per se, a contractual commitment. And it's because the average tenure is over 6 years for people that join boards. There's really no need if you're selecting the right people and they're self-selecting, which is really what a large part of it is. And coming onto a board, you ask for a commitment to input at least a year, right? Let's do this for at least a year. We're not going to sign you to anything to do that, but our expectation is if you're believing that this is going to be a value, then you're going to want to do it. And there should be no problem with mentally committing yourself to 12 months to do something and really allow it to work for you, because it does not happen overnight. A lot of relationship forming and vulnerability needs to happen in masterminds, and that just takes some time. And it takes time for people to understand you and the type of feedback that you can receive and will take, and then the type of feedback that it could be amazing advice, but for you, it could be terrible advice because you're never going to take it. And that takes time to develop. But I love that you started with that. And I'm not sure if your experience has been similar, but the idea that a mastermind can mean a lot of things versus peer advisory, which to me it has different elements and oftentimes a lot more structure to it.
Yeah. So, our experience really, started from, there was another financial advisor who's a good friend of mine, and we've been talking for years, that in certain ways in our business, we felt, I'll use the term, a little stuck, right? Or we're not getting new ideas, we're not getting feedbacks, because in our business, as you know, listeners might not know, in the financial advisory, wealth management business, there's lots of different business structures. And when you've truly, decided to set up as an independent shop, a truly independent shop, right? I won't go into the details. You can feel many times like you're on an island. And that's probably very similar to most businesses out there, right? So what we did was we tried to bring out these other, RIAs, these other true independents, and bring them together and start kind of sharing these ideas. And I love that term, peer advisory. And so in our first couple iterations of this, we brought people in where we had a meeting, they were somewhat involved, and then they bowed out. Right. And that's how it goes. And then, we kept inviting more people. I'd say right now, officially, we're 3. We've been as big as 5. We want to be 8. Right. But like finding that right person has been really, really hard. So I guess, let me throw that to you, in a question, that when you're putting these groups together, there's one thing to say, hey, we're all in the same business, right? Or the same industry. And I don't think that's the best reason of why to come together as a mastermind or a peer advisory group. It's really kind of these shared values, these willingness to be vulnerable and stuff like that. So when you're going out, and for those that might want to do it on their own, like we did, and we learned the hard way, what's the keys in trying to find that proper group that you think, hey, this might be a good peer advisory group for me?
I love a lot of what you said, and I can't address all of it, but
Okay.
we use some of the same language, man. This idea of you're being on an island, dealing with isolation and not having a sounding board to work through the decisions so you can make better decisions. I mean, that is a huge key element. It's interesting. Our belief is you don't want people from the same field, because it becomes almost an echo chamber if you're not really careful with it, because you're all coming from very similar places oftentimes. And so when we're cultivating our boards, we're very careful. I would argue there's 3 ingredients to a really successful mastermind or peer advisory board. First is having the right people in the room and being very intentional about who that is, which is what you asked, and I'll cover that. The second, to me, is having a really strong structure and process, which is what you probably are lacking very often in masterminds when people try to create them on their own. And then the third, which it sounds like you don't have, but we really believe in, is having somebody whose entire role is facilitation and keeping the group cohesive and moving forward as a unit. Coach gets overused here because, especially in masterminds and peer advisories, it shouldn't be coaching. There's really nobody who's directing the conversation and saying, I'm going to tell you how to do it. But it should be somebody who can keep everybody on track, make sure they're prepared, keep the buy-in, keep them engaged, and provide support after the fact. And so the people, the process, and then the facilitation are key to having a really strongly built out mastermind or peer advisory. When it comes to the people, it is all about mindset and values. You said it so well. You need to be able to find people who are dealing with similar challenges and their businesses are in similar stages and ages. When we say common challenges, isolation, being an island, you already identified. Overwork is another very common one where they just keep getting drawn back into the day-to-day of the business. They can't step out. And then lastly is the blind spots, just the unknown unknowns, the things that somebody doesn't even know they don't know. Mm-hmm. That can really get addressed by having that very diverse perspective. So you want people who are facing those challenges. You want them to have similarities and commonality in the regards to the stage of the business. You know, how mature is it? The age of the business, kind of where are they in their life as an owner, and the complexity of the business. That's the peer aspect to this. And then you need people that value feedback. And they also, whether or not it's the reason for joining or not, they like to provide value to others. You need people who want to receive and learn, and then you need people who want to give as well. And ideally, when you do cultivate a group of owners or professionals, however you're running this together, you're doing it in a way where you're taking people who have different strengths and are further ahead in different things, but further behind in other things. So you might have somebody who's really strong on the finance side, but really weak on marketing. And then you have somebody really strong on marketing, but maybe not as good as managing employees. And when you put them all in a room, now you have a really strong board that can truly help each other.
That's so awesome, Josh. I mean, you've nailed it so much. You know, I'll go to your last point first, the facilitator. We had someone kind of helping to facilitate us at the start, but then in time, it kind of became me, right? I was the most organized and setting it up. And that's why it's been tough. We're getting it back up and running again after a little bit of a lull because we're the business owners, right? You know, kind of, putting that together and everything. So that's a great point. That's something absolutely at one point we acknowledged that we need it, and we need to start looking at that again to help that going about. I'll comment on the other thing you say, the similar stages and ages. I love that comment. It's got to be that way, right? We had one that was a lot younger than us in a totally different situation, and he didn't work out, and we get it, right? He was at a very different stage and everything there. And it's interesting, yours is coming from all kinds of different businesses, whereas we are all in the same business, right? And I think so. That's interesting, right? That's two different types there. And I've heard the term advisory board from people from different businesses. It makes me think, right? Would we benefit from having a financial advisor in that room with us? But anyway, so the most the biggest part of it that became really just transformational for me, and I think other people in the group, is that early on, we started to try to, number one, we started to, try to get a system, a business operating system for us, all of us on. It's called the EOS system that we follow. A lot of people follow it. Put information out there in the show notes on that so people know. But the real big thing when this thing really took off is that first meeting where we sat down, man, and we just showed each other our numbers. And it's like, here they are, right?
Good for you. That takes some real, that's real sharing right there. That's not easy to do.
That was huge sharing. And we were all at different stages, right? We have some, larger practice and other practices. And it was great to be able to talk and be vulnerable like that. And it was really nice, kind of like to you point out, to having the right people in the room that no one judged. Everyone tried to be, positive. Hey, great, this, that, and the other. But a sharing like that, I find is kind of critical. I don't know if that's typical in these groups that get set up.
I don't think it is. And there's a lot of big name masterminds out there or peer advisor groups. And I feel as if there's some sacrifice of quality of the group results for building the groups, which I take just a real value problem with. I have a big stance against that, and my business partners do as well. And I'll just give an example. I don't believe you can be vulnerable without a whole lot of trust and a sense of security and safety. And that comes over time. It does not come when you have guests join a mastermind and come and go, which you talked about, some people coming and going. That really inhibits the people being vulnerable, because it's one thing for me to share with you if we have a shared commitment and I've learned to trust you and we've started to develop that relationship. It's a whole nother thing to have a stranger in the room and expect me to do the same thing. I'm just less likely to do it. So vulnerability is one of the key components in a successful mastermind and advisory board. And it's why when you're cultivating the people to join and you're really identifying who's a good fit, there's plenty of people where it could be an absolutely awesome resource for them, but they are not the right person to have in a mastermind if you want the group to get great results. Either they're not listening, they're too action oriented, they'll drop everything for a phone call. They are unwilling to let their ego and push it aside and really listen. It is about having somebody who is coachable and is committed to a bigger vision of what they want their business to be. By the way, though, I love the tracking of the KPIs. EOS is a great one. Catapult, somebody just introduced me to recently. That's really nice. We have our own system that we built out, and we use this SOC compliant secure vault for business owners to be able to add in their financials. And then we have strategy sessions outside of the actual mastermind to really facilitate some of the bigger vision picture and make sure that people are aligned on a monthly and a weekly basis with what they want to achieve long-term in their business. And more often than not, a lot of our focus is ultimately on exit planning and succession planning. How do we put ourselves in a position where we're maximizing value? And how do we put ourselves in a position where we're removing dependency, which is a really big deal for business owners to be able to have the business operate successfully without you there day to day. If God forbid something health-wise happens to you and you can't be in the business doesn't screech to a halt. Most business owners are not set up that way. That means really setting up the C-suite, the management team, so on and so forth. But you need KPIs and you need some sort of structure to be able to really do all those things.
Yeah, this is so great, man. So I'm gonna start picking your brain a little. Talk about what we're doing. You'll give feedback. You'll give best practices. So what we've done is we've tried to set it up for a couple times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, and we take 2 full days.
Wow,
we
nice.
go somewhere.
That's great.
We lock down, right? We turn off the phones. We have like kind of 4 sessions, AM, PM, AM, PM, and kind of go through that. And to your point, it's the in between the sessions. It's been hard for us to keep up and different stuff because once again, it's me facilitating. If I get busy, right, you can't go through it. How do most of the groups look? That's kind of like how we've chosen to do it. It's worked. I mean, how do you see a lot of these groups work? So people kind of have an idea, the kind of commitment that if you're looking to do this, you're looking to do it right. How will that look?
Yeah. What we've found, and my business partner has been doing this for 12 years. So this is not something new. It's a new joint venture under our brand, Evolve and Thrive, but the process behind it's been proven for over a decade. We found that monthly half days are generally the most that business owners are willing to invest in because it's a substantial pull away from what they're used to doing in their business. But we call it the 4% maximum. For the typical business owner, they're working 50+ hour weeks. If you're taking 4 hours out, you are, over the course of a month, you're only taking out 3 to 4% of your time at most in investing it to work on the business. However, monthly is probably not enough in the sense that you can't just have a monthly mastermind and expect people to really follow through on everything. So there's a few things that we do.
Josh, is that in person or is that virtual? What have you guys experienced through that?
We don't have virtual today because we find that in person is more effective. We've had virtuals run in the past and you can do them, but they have limitations. The biggest probably being just Zoom fatigue. It's one thing to do 4 hours in person. It's a whole nother thing to do 4 hours like this most people will lose their attention and they're much more quickly distracted virtual
Hmm.
because they have all their electronics in front of them. Just like I'm sure you have your phone near you, maybe even another screen. I do for sure. That's easy to get distracted over time. So we limit our groups to no more than 10 to ensure that it's true peer advisory, and the vast majority of the time is spent with people sharing what is their biggest challenge or opportunity that they're working on. It might not seem like a lot when you break that down. You say 4 hours, 10 people, it's about 15 minutes per person. But when you're getting intensive feedback from a bunch of peers that really understand what you're going through, that's a lot. It's almost like drinking out of a fire hose. You don't generally need more. But in addition to what we do in the actual meetings, we have accountability partners that are set up. They switch every month, and then it's up to the accountability partners how often they meet and how frequently. But we require at least once in between the monthly get-togethers. And then the support side of this can't be really minimized. There's three of us available outside of the meetings to really address things that didn't come up or to help people on their goals throughout the month, or to recognize when there's something more intensive that is needed. For example, an intensive strategy, or maybe you need to bring in a specialist for HR auditing or whatever it happens to be. That support is intrinsic to moving along people in between the meetings. And that's where the structure and the process to me really matters, Steve. I'll show you something really, really quickly here. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody that we work with works through a pretty in-depth advisory book. And this has a structure where it's, hey, you're not going into your first meeting in the dark. You know what your topic is. You've been coached on what that means. We make sure that it's appropriate for the vehicle of the mastermind, and it's not too broad or too narrow. You're tracking goals. You're setting up goals. You're talking about percent to goal. We're addressing mindset and how you're feeling in your work life. I'll use balance, but the stress management of running a business with everything else. Having something like this where you can really structure out exactly what's going to happen in a meeting and keep it on task is huge, not just in the meeting, but for all the time outside of the meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's interesting, Josh, that monthly in person, I couldn't agree more. In person is vital to the process. So our little group, we're all over the country, right, all throughout Florida and different things. And so that's why we can't meet as often. And I'll tell you, I've learned other financial advice, actually our similar business, groups, some that have lasted for a long time, that there's these groups all over the country, right? And they come together through that process, for it. And that's just kind of how ours has evolved. Let me ask you then as well, the next important part, like one of the ones I'm just telling you about that I got some feedback, I learned how they do it. They did it for over 20 years. This group of the same people in the group do you think, right? Because maybe it's the same people over and over. Do ideas get stale? We talk about, right, bringing new people in or not, fresh blood, items like that. What would you say is typically kind of the shelf life of one of these groups to maximize values? Do they ebb and flow? Is something like 20 years too long? I know you said your initial commitment of 1 year, and maybe your partner has been in it 12 years. Maybe they have groups that have been around for 12 years. What would you say kind of is kind of the sweet spot and the most valuable, like, kind of time frame there? And if you go longer, if you have one that goes longer versus one that goes shorter, maybe what are some of the characteristics of those that help that one go longer and remain valuable versus the shorter one?
So it's interesting. I don't think you'd see somebody in a group for 20 years if they weren't getting incredible results out of it.
Yeah.
Let's just put that out there first. There's no way you're going to continue doing something as a business owner that requires you to travel, to take out a couple days. I mean, that's a big investment for a lot of people. It doesn't come cheap. Hotel, flight, time, being away from my family, being away from the business, whatever it happens to be. So there's a real investment going on, which means there's a big return happening if you're doing something long term. Our tenure that we've experienced in our platform is over 6 years. Okay. And most of the time when people leave, it's because they leave the geography or they exit their business. It is not because they stop seeing value in the platform. I don't know that we ever get to a point where we're immune to the risk that we deal with as business owners and these challenges. You need a community if you want to really thrive. You do.
Yeah.
And the stronger the community and the closer they are as peers, the more effective it's going to be. We're always going to need to see outside perspective. We could look at something and say, this is the answer. And we could be in a room with 5 other people and they could have 5 different answers for us. And because of the context that we're working through, right? The lens that we see things through, our experience and how we've learned to deal with challenges in the past really drives how we come to that decision. To be able to gain that from others, that is invaluable. That just doesn't disappear. It doesn't matter how long you've been together. You still maintain that. So I don't know that there's a recipe per se for the difference in tenure, except if you build it with the right people and you have an effective process, the results will continue to come for as long as you're involved. Now, the one thing I'll differentiate with, and I think we've already tapped on this just a bit. You can't have somebody who's 3 years in business at a couple $100,000 in revenue in the room with somebody who's at $10 million of revenue and been in the business for 30 years. The challenges, the complexity, the stage of the business, the maturity of the business, all that matters, and they're not peers. So what we do is we offer 2 different levels of boards. We offer levels of boards that are really more for somebody who's not necessarily earlier in the business, right? It's not about the age of the business, but the business itself is a certain maturity. And it maybe has never grown beyond that maturity. And it's difficult to draw a line in the sand, but we might turn around and say, well, you're a solopreneur. You have a handful of employees that you work with, but less than 10 generally. And your revenue is probably less than 2 million. Maybe it's a little bit more, but you're not 20 million. You're not 30 million. You don't have 30 employees. You haven't been in business for 10 plus years. Right? There's definitely some ways to triage that down and say, yeah, this is a more effective board for you, and this would be a more effective board for somebody else. And oftentimes the process around that is different, right? Mm-hmm. For somebody who's the business is less mature, a lot of education around how to make it more mature and how to maybe change and shift the mindset to take on the challenges and opportunities to move the business into that direction. Whereas when you move into bigger businesses, bigger small businesses, a lot of times it's just, well, do we have the key personnel in the right positions? Have we just organically grown over 20 years and now we've got somebody who is a great technician as a COO and it just doesn't make sense? But yeah, how do we deal with that as an owner? How do we implement the full C-suite? How do we go ahead and scale to effectively capitalize on the value of the business? How do we put together a succession plan? It's just very different. So I can see it an absolute need to transition if you move from that level 1 stage, if you will, to our owner advisory boards to what we call our next level owner advisory boards, which are just more mature businesses. That's all.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think that makes a whole lot of sense, right? And I totally get that. So in our group, right, since we're all in the same business, our revenues, I would say, especially when we started, we had some that were double the revenue of other groups, right? And even though they were very different, there were very, very similar factors because we were in the same business. Maybe the bigger group was dealing with a little more HR stuff than the smaller group, but the core items of being an independent firm, they were very similar. And now, as we've all grown, right, we've kind of seen it. The larger firm, as we've all grown to like where they were, we kind of see where they were, and that's been very valuable. But I found what's really interesting is the largest, the biggest quote unquote highest revenue firm. That individual keeps asking, "Hey, I don't want to be the largest firm, right? I want to get someone a little larger than me than where we're going to, right?" So that's something we continually discuss and bring them in. But then to your point, right? If we keep under that mentality between, let's say we go max out 10, between 1 and 10, how different are we? Right. So that's kind of that's an interesting part to it. And we're hopefully going to bring in more seasoned firms like that kind of and we view it as kind of like the growth, the trajectory in our business.
And that's very common to hear from people who are exploring masterminds and owner advisory boards. Steve, you get people who are like, I want to be the smallest in the room. Well, of course you do, because all you want is feedback from everybody else so you can become bigger. I mean, I think that's pretty natural. The problem is if you're the smallest in the room, you're probably not able to add a tremendous amount of value if that is the benchmark, right?
Mhm.
And that's where using revenue as a benchmark and a litmus test is a dangerous thing, because you could have twice the revenue as somebody else and you could suck at some things that they're really freaking good at.
Yeah.
And so, you know what? I want them in the room with me. I don't care that I'm twice the revenue at them. If I need help getting better at this or making decisions around this, or just knowing that, oh, that stove is hot over there. And I would have never known that without that person in the room. I don't care that they're half the revenue that I am. It doesn't matter. But it is natural. And this circles back to you need to be able to put people in the room where there's various strengths and it's apparent.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it's effective. So I would hazard a guess that who you just mentioned, whatever business that is, where they're the biggest in the room, if you brought in somebody that was smaller than them, but was a real strength in something that they're not great in, like, for example, oh, I come from a HR background and I know how to deal with 1,000 employees. That person would probably, it doesn't matter if their business was $100,000 in revenue in that sense, because they'd be like, oh my gosh, you have the keys and the answers that I need to be able to scale now that I'm at this stage. That to me is what's going to make the difference in a good group, is just having that the broad strengths in different areas.
No, you nailed it, and that's exactly his issue. But he admits it, and that's funny. So Josh, let's I really appreciate this. Has been really great. Let's tie this up a little bit here to say, so if someone's out there is listening and they're looking, hey, I've been thinking about a mastermind. I've been listening to Josh and Steve about doing this. I mean, what would be the first steps for them to go to try to put one together? Because, through my experience, what I did was I went and we tried to find people that were similar to us. And we have our key connection on our side was we all use the same investment platform. And so we went out to them and we gave them a criteria. Hey, this is who we're looking for. And they brought people to the table for us. And that might not be as readily available to somebody else. So for someone that's looking to do it, right, it might be harder. Do they try to kind of find peers, or is their time better spent to go, kind of like a peer recruitment service to say, hey, how can we get this started? How can we get this going?
In my experience, having gone into this joint venture less than a year ago, it's a full-time job putting together and finding real peers. Especially if you're looking for peers that are coming from a diverse perspective and different businesses, because it's one thing, you have an investment management platform and I'm involved with some associations where it's all people in the same industry. That's kind of a little easier. If we're all in the same industry, we all have something in common that we can connect through generally, whether it's the route you went or somewhere else. But it's really, really difficult to find the right people without being very intentional around it, or without being really established already. I mean, a really mature business and mature in your region and within your industry. So I would recommend knowing that there's plenty of masterminds out there. Probably get involved with something that's already out there, whether it's something you travel to, whether it's virtual, whether it's localized like what we do, and learn a little bit about the experience before you try to do it yourself. And you'll probably pick up quite a lot that you don't want to do, and quite a lot that you do want to do simply by experiencing it before you try to do it yourself. That's the best advice I could possibly give.
That's great advice, man. And I'm so freaking stubborn. I always do it the hard way and learn it myself and go through all that. That's kind of how I learn. I enjoy it. I don't mind making mistakes, because that's a learning experience. Okay, check that off. I don't have to think about that again. But Josh, man, listen, this has been really, really great. For any of those people out there listening, we're going to put all your information as we post this everywhere and stuff like that to reach out to you guys. And as I always say, for anyone that's, if they've stayed with us this long to the end of the podcast, hey, reach out. Let me know if you have any questions about anything we talked about today. If you have ideas for other items, let me know. And we really, wonderful. We'd like to feature those. We could feature you on this podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. I love the conversation. Thank you for having me, Steve. An absolute pleasure.